Welcome to the Moving Forward podcast. This is your host, Corey Cottrell, and my fantastic rosé holding co-host, Rio Verdenier. So
hey,
classy.
guys, cheers.
So classy. We're going to do, on this episode, we are going to do all of the drugs. All of them.
Well, really just alcohol, but we're going to talk about the rest of them.
That you know of. We could be on all the drugs. Probably not, though.
I'm pretty sure the Coke I did last night is worn off. So
hello. Even
I'm just going to let you guys decide whether you think that's a joke or not.
Nice. That's awesome. So, now that we're all having fun, I'm going to talk about the opioid crisis, which is just super fun.
We're keeping it light today.
Right? It's drug problems, but for white people. Approximately 115 Americans die each day from an opioid overdose. Many more struggle with the addiction, including all the negative health and behavioral impacts that it entails. Nearly 220 million prescriptions for opioids were written in 2016, despite the risks of these drugs being well known, and over 2.6 million are addicted to opiates. That's crazy. Outside of the immediate health effects, drug trafficking and related crimes have sprung up in communities throughout America in order to cater to these addictions. And our country's healthcare system, complicit in the creation of the crisis, hasn't found a way to treat the outbreak. The opioid crisis isn't just a nationwide public health emergency, it's a national crisis. Tens of thousands of people are dying each year, with millions more suffering from an addiction. Many of these people's addictions started when they were prescribed these medications by a doctor. The human suffering caused by this crisis cannot be measured, and the economic damage is untold. We must do more than declare this a crisis and hope the issue resolves itself. The federal government, through the Department of Health and Human Services, must find solutions to this emergency and coordinate with the states in its implementation. The CDC must use its expertise to quantify and combat this plague. The FDA must implement new steps to ensure that a similar crisis doesn't develop in the future. Most of all, we have to fund treatment for everyday Americans. However, the federal government must also recognize its limitations in this crisis. While funding research and solutions is something the federal government is good at, this epidemic is affecting people on an individual level. Local governments will be much better able to experiment with and implement solutions that will work for their communities. The federal government, through funding and centralization, can help the work of states and local communities in this crisis, but it should serve as a motivating and coordinating force in order to ensure adopted policies work for the people on the ground. So problems to be solved. Opioid epidemic is destroying the lives of millions of people directly and untold millions more through the impact that they're seeing out of it on their loved ones. The regulation of drugs and the sale of those drugs for unintended uses must be improved. Treatment resources are lacking, with only a fraction of addicts able to effectively recover from their addiction. So as president, I will declare a state of emergency. Yang will, of course, declare a state of emergency and seek to bring down both the overdose numbers and the addiction levels by 20% within 4 years. I love that he quantifies that. Quintuple federal funding from $4.5 to $20 billion per year, directed toward addiction treatment and rehabilitation for addictive opiates at the local levels. Impose a new tax on opiate manufacturers to fund treatment and rehabilitation retroactive to 2005. The drug companies will pay to treat the conditions they have profited from. The FDA should allow only doctors who complete specialized education in pain management to prescribe opioids for more than a few days. All states should limit the size of prescriptions and require all opioid prescriptions to be made from hospitals instead of individual offices or practices. Right now, our prescription rate is 4 times higher than in Europe. We need to bring it down. Doctors need to tell more patients that they'll feel better on their own without having to take opiates. Direct the Department of Health and Human Services to focus their resources on combating the epidemic until it's under control. Create a centralized database of solutions and effectiveness. Create a centralized database of data to help analyze the trends of the opioid epidemic and better target resources. Provide funding to localities to experiment with solutions that work for their communities. Direct the FDA to regulate pharmaceutical company marketing tactics as much as they regulate the release of new drugs. Insurance companies should provide more oversight of prescriptions to curb abuse and report these measures to the Department of Health and Human Services. Overdose patients should be sent to mandatory treatment centers for 3 days to convince them to seek long-term treatment. I'm kind of amazed that doesn't exist already. Work with the DEA to enforce a much stricter limit on the number of opioid-based medications that can be produced in any given year, and instruct manufacturers to report drugs prescribed in each community so as to monitor excess supply and probable abuse. Destigmatize medication-based treatment options for opiate addiction. We need to do whatever works best, including drugs that enable addicts to recover in stages. Allow local law enforcement authorities to selectively enforce criminal law related to use and possession of opioids to facilitate treatment, and work to limit the importation of heroin and fentanyl, particularly from China. The Chinese government must do more to curb supply before it enters our country. We should negotiate for marked and demonstrated reductions in return for continued market access. And I will go through really quickly. He talks about decriminalizing opioids as well, and it really just fits into this, right? In the description, he talks more or less the same thing, but as President Andrew Yang will drastically increase funding to treatment programs for opioid users, as we discussed, through fines levied against the companies that marketed these drugs. Decriminalize at the federal level small quantities of opioid use and possession, anything under 5 to 10 days of personal use. Make treatment programs much more available and affordable to anyone found with small quantities of these drugs. Provide grants for their own treatment programs to states that decriminalize small quantities of opioid use or possession. So basically, decriminalize it to stop putting people in jail instead of treating them, and then, I don't know, treat them, and also make the drug companies that profited off of putting all these things on drugs that they knew were going to be addictive, make them pay for it.
Yeah, boy, that is just a really,
it's a lot.
No, yeah, it is a lot. There's a lot to talk about there. But yeah, I mean, it's a good. I mean, this won't surprise our listeners because I'm definitely on the libertarian side of the right, so I'm totally on board with decriminalizing drugs.
Right.
Yeah, I think that right now, it's not like responsible recreational use of drugs isn't the problem. The problem is people who are addicted to them, and the people who are addicted to them are afraid to seek treatment for that reason. So that's a good policy. And I absolutely love the idea of paying for it with a tax on the opiate producers. Not because I think that, high taxes on drug companies in and of itself is a good thing, but I mean, if somebody has to pay for it, it makes more sense for them to pay for it rather than you and me, Corey, right? I don't. Right. And very consistently with our previous conversations, anything that involves higher taxes on me, I tend to oppose that. So yeah, let's make them pay for it. I like it. I'm assuming you're on board with this too, Corey.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, what they did was extremely nefarious, and really obviously so. It's been proven, in a lot of different ways that they're culpable, and there should be a lot of penalties.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. You mean like the way that this actually ties in nicely with Yang's policy, his Medicare for All policy, because I think it was the first one we talked about, right? Yeah. So yeah, in that policy, he talked about, among other things, paying doctors with a salary rather than based on how much they prescribe and how many surgeries they do and so forth. Because right now our current system is set up in such a way that everybody is motivated to give everybody the maximum amounts of treatments and drugs, whether they need them or not. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, on the one hand, like, I think if people want to do drugs recreationally, I'm fine with that. But on the other hand, this really isn't a but. I feel like they're compatible. When your doctor tells you, hey, you need this, and you start taking it, and then you end up getting addicted to it, there's some culpability there, especially if you didn't need it in the first place. So I don't know if I would go so far as to say as it was nefarious. I think at a minimum, it was irresponsible. And that once people realized it was a problem, there was no motivation for people to actually fix the problem because everybody who could fix it was making bank off of it, including the doctors. So we need to do something about that.
Yeah, that's what I mean by nefarious. If you're putting your own profits above putting people on a drug that they're going to get, that for a fact they're going to get addicted to, and then when you pull their supply, they're going to have to go to heroin or other things.
Yeah,
that's at best morally bankrupt. And there should be some
yeah, and I mean we should clarify. It's not like all doctors. I'm sure there are lots of good doctors out there who refuse to participate.
Absolutely, yeah. And my wife's a pharmacist. She actually here in was up a little bit further north in Hudson, up just north of Tampa in Florida. Was the one store was doing more prescriptions for opioids than the rest of Florida.
Jeez.
And it's because people from Kentucky, Alabama, all these other places were coming down to this one place and they were just buying
Yeah, and
pain clinics were all over the place. Like it was unreal. And she actually got, like, right after that all got shut down, is when we moved back here from San Diego, and she ended up working at that store. And like I can't even imagine the amount of just utter crap that she had to take for so long, because she's a stickler. She's like, no, these are the rules. And she's, like a neuropharmacologist from the VA, was her, like, she's clinically trained. She's like, I'm not going to give your grandmother 380 pills that would kill a horse. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do it. Right. So she got yelled at a lot, but it was really ridiculous. But I think, going back to the point, I made the point about accountability, that the thing about Andrew Yang, and, we're going to beat this forever, this particular drum, is that he goes right to the meat of the problem. And, accountability is in there, but the point is we have to solve the frickin' problem. That's the biggest thing. Right now, there are millions of people suffering in a way that is absolutely insane, and it needs to be solved. It just does, right? And then maybe this is the tie-in, right? This to me is the white person's drug problem, right? It's actually making it so that, if you're hooked on drugs, like when people were hooked on crack, nobody was talking about problems to solve it. They were like, oh my God, you have to put those black people in jail.
They thought the problem was the addicts, not the addiction. Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Right. He's not repeating that problem.
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, again, Yang's platform is a jigsaw puzzle where everything fits together.
Right.
And, he talks about the freedom dividend and other policies of his being beneficial in terms of putting people in a mindset of abundance instead of a mindset of scarcity, doing away with the problem of desperation. The rise of populism and extremism in general is, a side effect of the fact that a lot of people are struggling. So people are basically self-medicating in middle America because they feel like they have nothing to contribute. They're all the jobs are disappearing. What else are they going to do? I mean, I can hardly blame them for wanting to get high and zone out. So he is addressing the problem directly through treatment and decriminalization and making the drug companies pay for it. But also his other policies all address the underlying issue of all those the psychological and economic problems that are the real cause of ongoing long-term drug addiction is really often brought on by just bad economic circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. And so the tie-in for the other thing that we need to do, like, he's going in and he's solving this problem, and the other problem with the criminalization of marijuana vastly out, like, proportionally affects communities that are African American communities and young men, frankly, far more than.
No, I know a white guy who went to jail for it too. So
that's the fun thing about statistics. You can find one person that is the one out of the 99. But no, like I think it's something like 5 or 6 times more per capita.
Well, I mean, he was selling it, but still.
Yeah, no, but the end of the thing, right? Like 5 or 6 times more people per capita are in jail who are black for stupid pot charges.
Well, yeah, no, and it regardless of a person's race, there's something fucked up about the fact that there are people who very recently have gone to jail, or in some cases still are going to jail for doing something that's illegal now, right?
Yeah.
So it's just
crazy.
It is so wrong. I mean, my friend was like an entrepreneur. He was doing great. He was taking care of his wife. He was going out to the same fancy restaurants that I go to, and was like, he was doing good. He's like, yeah, he felt good about himself. He's running a business. What's wrong with that? He wasn't hurting anybody. It's not like he was, and when you make drugs illegal, I mean, you should probably actually read his policy at some point, Corey.
Yeah, no, I totally will.
But you're right, it does tie in, because when you make drugs illegal, what that does is it actually just increases all the negative consequences of it.
Right.
Because when you make someone a criminal, that's when you wind up in situations where, like, if a business partner screws you over, you can't go to the Better Business Bureau or the police like you normally would. You have to make an example of them, and then that's why you get all that weird
Second Amendment remedies.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you get the crime and stuff. So, like, it's a consequence of the fact that it's illegal. That's what, like, we're actually making crime worse through this policy. It's, I mean, our current war on drugs, so to speak, which we're losing. It's not.
Well, it's dumb. It's like having a war on terrorism. You're having a war on a word that doesn't mean anything. Like, it just.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't like that example because, I know, I understand why you made that example, but I don't like it personally because I think terrorism is something we should have a war on. But you're right that
it's a whole other discussion.
Well, I agreed, but but I don't want to legalize terrorism, right? So, like, the example doesn't. the example doesn't follow there. It doesn't.
Okay,
Doesn't,
way to bring it back.
Right.
Yep. Nope.
Yeah. Okay.
I
So,
am
so what's Yang's actual policy about
Yeah,
marijuana?
right? Yeah, I hate the war on thing, but legalizing terrorism, definitely hard no for me. That's a horrible idea. Okay, so here is the policy. Marijuana is still considered a controlled substance by federal law. Thousands are in jail for marijuana-related offenses, particularly people of color. Yet marijuana is now legal for adult use in 9 states, and 29 states have legalized medical marijuana in some form. We need to solve the ambiguity and legalize marijuana at the federal level. This would improve safety, social equity, and generate tens of billions of dollars in new revenue based on legal cannabis businesses. I don't love marijuana. He probably does. It's just now that said, I am a musician. I absolutely do not. And like almost everyone I love absolutely loves it. Anyway, I'm totally just kidding. But
yeah, I don't. I've obviously done my share. It's not my favorite drug. Yeah, but you know what? For the people who like it, let's make it legal.
I have favorite drugs. We could do a whole episode on those. So I'd rather people not use it heavily, but it's vastly safer than people becoming addicted to opiates like heroin. And our criminalization of it seems stupid and racist. Thank you for just saying the obvious, particularly now that it's legal in some states. We should proceed with full legalization of marijuana and pardon those in jail for nonviolent marijuana-related offenses. It's a safer, less addictive means to manage pain for many Americans. So as president, Andrew Yang will support the full legalization of marijuana at the federal level and remove it from controlled substances list, expunge the federal convictions of all marijuana-related use or possession offenses, identify nonviolent drug offenders for probation and potential early release. He has also said, I want to add into this, that he would literally give a pardon to everybody who was in this, had an offense like this, and release them all on 420 and stand outside the jail and high five everyone, which is perfectly cheeky. I am a fan of all of that.
He's I think he's Gen X basically. He would be our first Gen X president. And that's showing. His youth is showing. And also frankly, but a pardon, that's a big deal because it's not just releasing people. Pardoning means it's not going to be on the record anymore, and that's huge.
Better, right? It makes more sense.
So especially, so I really take issue, and I understand why he uses it. I take issue with this phrase "non-violent drug offenses." Like, violence is illegal, right? So like, it's not a drug. If you're right, so it's like what he's saying is people whose only crime was possession or selling drugs, as opposed to people who also committed additional crimes that are not related to drugs, right? Like, whatever your motivation is, if you murder somebody because you want to take their shoes, or because you're trying to make a point in a drug war, they're both murder, right? So he's basically reassuring
murder.
The sky is falling. People who are like, oh, he wants to make everything legal. No, he wants to make things that shouldn't have been made illegal in the first place.
If you watch Fox News, violent crime implied by black people is connected with drugs every time they bring up one of those two things, right? So I think it's a way to start creating a wedge in people's minds that have not had the capacity to kind of think.
Totally a wedge issue. That's absolutely what it is.
Right. So to us, like, it's really obvious that nonviolent drug crimes are you could just call them drug crimes, but it's a way to speak to those Fox News viewers, like the 65-year-old super angry white dude who like sits and just watches Fox News all day. You have to say that for him. Otherwise it's not gonna, it's going to bounce off his head anyway.
Oh, yeah, no, I get why you said it. I just thought it was worth pointing out.
For people that like to think their way through things, I really love that you made that distinction, because it's true. It's not like murder is murder, assault is assault. It has nothing to do with whether or not you have pot in your car. They're not connected.
Part of the reason that we had our friend Kyle on a few episodes ago was because I think that these wedge issues are a cynical side effect, and both parties are guilty of it, of basically wanting to distract people from what I would argue are the things that actually matter. And I think most Americans, if they're reflective, would agree. But with these wedge issues, and this is one of them, so ironically, I really don't think that like Rupert Murdoch and, the rest of the Fox News team are, I don't think they really care about this issue. I really don't.
No, I don't think they care about anything.
I think
They know what will get them attention and what will give their political power base more power.
Right.
I don't think they care about any of it, to be honest.
But the reason I brought up Kyle, that must have sounded like it came out of left field. The reason I brought up Kyle is because we had him on because he's a he's a working class or even working poor, in his words, conservative, right? Fiscal conservative. And I think it's important to point out that these people exist because there is this cynical, I do. I think it's important because there is this cynical belief in the Republican Party that kind of made them have this the Southern strategy, and their goal was to essentially try to trick people into voting, quote, against their interests by, appealing to these wedge issues like, scare tactics with drugs and black people and abortion and same-sex marriage and that kind of stuff. But I don't think it's necessary. Part of what I love about Yang, he actually has, in many respects, a pretty conservative platform. Part of what I like about Yang is he just trusts the American people to vote based on the good things about his platform, right? He doesn't need to distract them with wedge issues. He tries to get around the wedge issues. He wants to avoid identity politics and all that stuff. So he's saying like, hey, let's make an argument for this freedom dividend, which is essentially tax relief, right? And let's talk about the benefits of getting people off of welfare so they can escape the welfare. Is that your dog, Furry?
No, that's yours.
Really? He's not even in the room with me. This microphone is so powerful.
That's totally that's funny.
Yeah, no, but like what's so great is that like you can Yang trusts people to say he wants to talk to people on the left and the right and say, hey guys, let's vote for these policies because they're good policies,
right?
Rather than playing that game where, and the Democrats are guilty of it too. The Clintons did this to a large extent. They playing this game where, you think the average voter is an idiot and that you have to reach them with bumper stickers and wedge issues. And that's the only way you're going to get them to vote because they're not smart enough to be trusted with the details of your policy. I am beyond fed up with that bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it. I mean, we live in a country where, and right after 2016, my favorite phrase and still is never overestimate the American electorate because you shouldn't. I mean, there's stupid people everywhere, that's for sure. But it's just. But look what he did. Look from a branding perspective. Look what he did. Right. He's got 3 policies for people that aren't paying attention. Right. Centered capitalism. Okay. That maybe people aren't going to pay attention to that. We're going to give you $1,000 a month. Sorry, what now? Right, like that for those people. That's the cutting through the noise of the honey boo boo culture to like that's going to get their attention. But then he launches like 9,000 entirely perfectly, like you said, jigsaw puzzled together policies that solve basically every problem in America. Period. Thanks for playing. So he's doing both games, I think, in a way that is novel and new. Right? He's not doing the cynical wedge issue thing, but he's using that the simplicity of that, which is the tool they were trying to use.
Well, and his freedom dividend policy is, I get that it's a hook that gets people's attention, right? But that actually backfires as often as it helps him because people just go straight. Certainly on the right, I see a lot. People go straight to, oh, that's just a handout, that's socialism. But in reality, it's actually the most conservative fiscal policy of anybody who's running, including Trump.
I love when you say shit like that.
But it is, if you think about it, it's essentially tax relief for the middle class, right? But it's getting people off welfare. I mean, like that is a conservative wet dream. Which is why smart conservatives support it. And to Fox News' credit, they've given Yang some of his best coverage, actually.
I completely totally agree. Yep.
And so your point about them using scare tactics to try to get people to vote, quote, against their own interests is totally true. And again, both sides do it. MSNBC does it as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what? I'll even go so far as to say, like, I really, really, really believe in small government and low taxes and all the things that I say I believe in. I'm not lying. I mean it. And so because I believe in that, if it were true that human nature is such that in a democracy, the only way you could maintain those things that I treasure is by tricking dumb people based on wedge issues, then I would be like, you know what? Like, trick the dumb people based on wedge issues. If that's what it takes, do it. But I just don't believe that's true. Maybe there was a time when it was true, but it's not working anymore. And I think we need to have an argument with people. And what just happened with you and me, right? Like in our last episode, I convinced you to basically support my tax policy, right? So like, I didn't do that by saying like, scaring you about the gays. I did it by talking taxes, right? Right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like those, it might shock you, but like who people have sex with is not related to, like it doesn't impact your life in any way. But the amount of money that the federal government is taking out of your paycheck every month sure as hell does.
Right? Yeah. If you're too busy thinking about the magical Sky King, wanting to put you in gay conversion therapy, instead of getting $1,000 a month, just stop and consider your life.
Well, and also, frankly, I mean, if whatever, like, I'm not religious. If people, I believe in freedom of religion, and freedom of religion, people forget, includes like the right for people to disagree with you and not
freedom
using the government
from religion.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's not using the government to force your beliefs on anybody else.
Right.
And so the small government position on that issue is they should stay out of it. I think that the left takes it too far sometimes, and they try to what's the word? They try to like police people's speech too much. But I think that the best disinfectant is just like a little more sunlight. So like you just bring it out there, let people talk, and if somebody I think we need to resolve those kinds of issues culturally, not through with the sledgehammer of the federal government.
One thing that I'll mention, and because I agree with you, like more conversation is better, right? Like more engagement. Mm-hmm. So this goes back to the last episode that we did where we were talking about the tax day thing. I go back to stuff like that where he's bringing and time bank hours that we'll get to at some point. Like that, he's doing things that will very obviously, to people that are paying attention, increase engagement at a visceral level in this idea of society. There's a podcast by Radiolab called Fix the Vote, where the first 15 to 20 minutes of it is talking about the fact that people are feeling disconnected from results of voting. Right, so you vote, you don't feel it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, like, rich people are going to do what the rich people are going to do. They're just going to be for corporations, whatever, right? And in everywhere where the poll numbers go up that you feel disaffected, authoritarian governments are taking over, period. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, exactly. And so people who believe in freedom, people who want, regardless of what your opinions are on, tax policy and regulation and things like that, if in general you like the idea of the government is there to safeguard your freedoms rather than to trample all over them, we really do need to recognize this populist phenomenon for the problem that it is. I don't, Corey, you and I actually agree about that, but maybe we should come back to it a little bit, because I noticed some people some fans of our show, genuine fans who really like us, took issue with that, and they thought that I was an elitist snob. So is there anything that you, as the leftist on this, is there anything you can say to reassure people that I am?
It's the socialist problem, right? When you say populism, people are not thinking in their brain, that collection of noises coming out of your face has nothing to do with their experience of that word, right? Like
they think it means popular. Yeah, like
that's what I'm saying. Like you have a highfalutin education where the word populism means something. There's a definition. You get a if you get it right. You get an F if you get it wrong. And that, like, literally everybody else is not hearing that word. That's like anytime anyone says socialist, they're not fucking talking about Bernie Sanders. Not really. And they're definitely not talking about most of the other people that are
including Bernie himself, for some reason, keeps you saying
that's what I'm saying. Like, what I'm saying, the point I think is, and this is why I started like demanding that we attach policies to things, is that we're having a semantics argument that's wasting time. Right?
Well, yeah, exactly. And exactly. And what your insistence on attaching it to a policy really does demonstrate the problem with that word, because populism isn't a policy. It's not a set of policies. So if it were true as some
populist to you, let's say, okay, I'm a populist, right? Like Donald Trump's populist, and there's certain ways that you could call Bernie Sanders a populist. What makes either one of those two human beings, by the definition that you have of populism, never mind if you're listening to this show, never mind what you think, because I probably agree with you about what I think of when I think about populism, but to real, and probably the actual, sort of historical definition, what are they doing that is quote unquote populist to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point, is that it's nothing to do with their set of policies. It's about, the idea is it's a rhetorical technique that you claim to be representing, quote, the people against elites. That's the definition of populism, and any definition you look up, that's what it'll say. Now, where you can get into a debate is, are they actually representing the people against elites? And that's I mean, I think in a democracy, well, not just I think, I mean, by definition, in a democracy, you're supposed to be representing the interests of like what you think is best for society in general, but you're also,
Right.
frankly, all you're ever truly representing is at best a majority of the population. You're not really representing everybody because nobody ever gets 100% of the vote, right? And
Right.
so in that sense, I think it's just not only is it not a set of policies, because you can say you're representing the people and also simultaneously be doing things that are bad for the people, which in reality, most of the time when people use populist rhetoric, that's actually how it works out. But like, even if you were doing things that are good for society, then you should just do what Yang is doing and just make an argument that it's good for society, not create this like false narrative that you somehow represent like everybody as if we weren't a group of individuals, as if everybody had exactly the same interests and exactly the same priorities. That's just not true, right? I mean, if that were true, then democracy wouldn't actually be necessary. The reason democracy is necessary is because we don't all agree about everything. And part of being a good leader is respecting the people who disagree with you. And that's what populism fails to do.
That's okay. I like that. And again, like I think that for people that think about, generally, I think people that think about Bernie Sanders as an example as a populist, I think it actually does fit your argument that he's talking about fighting the elites to an extent. Elizabeth Warren does the same thing. They're basically saying like you have been disaffected. Well,
Yang says that too. That's not what I'm talking about. Yep.
Okay, but I think maybe the phrase that we should clue in on is the rhetorical definitions of it, like really making an enemy of the other, which
exactly right. And
okay,
so in Trump's case, he does it by, right. So populism most of the time leads to scapegoats. That's basically what it is, right?
Okay.
So like in Nazi Germany, the scapegoats were the Jews and disabled people and gays and so forth. But the fact that it was the Jews didn't come out of nowhere. It's because they were associated with being part of the capitalist class. They were associated with being the bankers and stuff like that. And people were having economic troubles, and they're like, well, we've got to take these people down. So in a way, Nazi Germany was actually very similar to the communist revolution with the Khmer Rouge situation. So like so what are those even though their actual policies were wildly different, right? The Khmer Rouge and Nazi Germany. I mean, one thing they had in common is they sure like to kill lots of people, but their actual like political policies were very different from each other, right?
Yeah.
But what made them similar was that they both claimed to be representing, quote, the people. And then the people is usually defined in a narrow way. So like with Bernie Sanders, he doesn't mean rich people, right? They're not part of the people, right? They're part of the elites. So like,
that's the important, like that, if you get nothing else from this conversation, I think that's the sort of clue in, right? Whereas I think the distinction I would immediately draw between Trump and Bernie is Bernie's actually going to do things, if elected, to dramatically move the needle for people, even if it's just Medicare for all. We had a whole episode about that. We can get into the conversation about that later.
But he also might do a lot of things that, despite his good
that you disagree with economically, but literally will help people on the ground.
Will help some people and will possibly do a lot of unintended damage as well.
Okay, I'll take that. But the point being, his intentions are actually pure, even though we disagree on some of the implementations of those things.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's fair.
Where Trump is a fucking piece of garbage. Like that's what I mean. Like at no point, and no one will ever make me believe this. At no point has Trump ever thought about anyone other than himself for 1 millisecond ever.
I remember reading an interview. No, it wasn't an interview. It was an essay that this writer for the New York Times wrote, and he was basically in the context of a larger essay. I don't remember the writer's name right now, but basically what he was saying is he was talking about Trump, and he mentioned that he was in Trump's car one time interviewing Trump because we all know like Trump loves to be the center of the spotlight. So he loves journalism and journalists as long as they are talking about him. And that's actually one of his geniuses, is he understands there's no such thing as bad publicity. And it turns out that is true because he's had nothing but bad publicity, and he's been great president.
I wish I could argue with that. You're totally right.
Yeah, no, he's right about that. Unfortunately. So this journalist was in the car with him, and Trump was together in the car. They're driving away from a rally. And this woman shouts at the car, like, "God bless you, Trump. Thank you. You're saving America," or something along those lines. And Trump turns to the journalist and says, "Isn't that pathetic?" And I fully believe that he said that. I fully believe that,
Yeah,
because
of course he did. Of course he
I,
did.
I don't. So I think you're right. By the way, I despise Bernie Sanders. I despise him so much.
I know, but it's irrational.
I am happy to admit that I think his intentions, the road to hell is often paved with good intentions.
Well, yeah.
I will grant you that Sanders' intentions seem to be better.
Well, they are.
Okay, but good intentions aren't enough. You also need good ideas.
That's the thing. You can disagree with someone who wants to implement a policy that is identical to Andrew Yang's, period. But at the same, like, you know, like, and again, like, if we had Bernie Sanders, here's the thing.
But it's not his Medicare for all. It's not his Medicare for all that makes me dislike him. It's things like the federal jobs guarantee. It's things like,
and honestly, like, this is where we would agree, right? But it's policies. Like, if we sat down in a room, we could hang out and we could have this conversation with Bernie Sanders, and it would be in good faith.
He would hate me so much.
Honestly, I don't think he would. Like, it would be in good, because if I can have a conversation with you, Bernie Sanders totally could. Bernie Sanders hangs out in the same room as Mitch McConnell and hasn't murdered anyone yet. So that's a whole thing. But like, that good faith argument, I think is the key, where, because people call Bernie populist, and they call Trump a populist, and they're fundamentally different, because Donald Trump doesn't give a he literally will look at somebody who's fawning over them like, oh, isn't that pathetic? Because of course he does that. Whereas Bernie Sanders is like, how do I get that person Medicare for all? He honestly believes that. I totally believe it, right? And politics, whatever. That I think that's where people get a little bit squirrely about that term, is that some of the people that are backing actually doing real good are called populists by rich people that don't want to get taxed more.
Yeah, that's true, but I mean, but that's not how I'm using it. Right?
No, and that's the thing. So, I saw a bit of that conversation in the thread,
right?
And that was the whole thing. It was semantics, right? But it like the bringing it back to Well,
that particular fellow is God bless him, is a Trump supporter. So like, I mean, he was coming from a position of trying to defend Trump, right? But no, I mean, frankly, I don't think Trump. And I mean, that's not true. There are definitely like some people who supported Sanders in the primary and then turned around and voted for Trump in the general.
Yeah, not that many though, but
that happened. But like the majority of Sanders supporters and the majority of Trump supporters probably resent the comparison. But the fact is that in terms of the rhetoric they use, they both fit the definition of a populist. Yang's policies they fit the popular understanding of what that term means.
I agree.
But his actual rhetoric is exactly the opposite of populism. He says things like, the tech industry, like he flat out said, like half of the tech giants, the people at the heads of the tech giants, who knows, actually support the freedom dividend, right? So whereas Bernie Sanders, I don't believe he could say something like that, because it's such an essential part of his narrative.
That's interesting.
Like appeal that rich people all have to be, right?
Yeah.
And I like that. So reality is always more complicated than that, right? It's not all working class people are good people, and not all rich people are evil people. Like there's more to it than just right. Otherwise, the definition of moral would just be a matter of how much money was in your bank account. That's not what any of us actually mean by that.
Or how equal things were, and both of those things are equally stupid.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we should probably bring it back to the actual topic of this episode.
What are we talking about?
We're talking about we're drinking alcohol and talking about legalizing drugs.
Yes, we're doing all the drugs. No, I'm glad, because I skimmed over that thread and saw that happening. And again, I urge the community that is growing up around this podcast, which, by the way, like, thanks for that. That is a big deal. I urge the community to, when you get into those kinds of conversations where it's clear it's a semantics issue, to draw it back into a policy, to draw it back into a good faith discussion of, what does that word mean to you? That's not what that word means to me. And honestly, just both of you understand that doesn't matter. You're just talking about different things, right? But then you can actually have an interesting conversation the way we just did about what it means to be creating another. Because I think there's some implications to that, and I think that Bernie Sanders is doing it. Probably all politicians are doing it.
I was about to say,
Yang honestly doesn't, right? Like,
rhetoric does matter, right? And
it does.
So when people talk, rhetoric matters because character matters. And even though I'm willing to grant you that Sanders has good intentions in terms of his policy, I do think that there is a character defect in anybody who buys into rhetoric that is about demonizing a group of people. And demonizing rich people and demonizing the intellectual and economic elite of a country is something that we have seen repeat over and over again in history, and it's never goes well. You don't tell a mob of angry, desperate people that all their problems are the fault of a certain class. That's just terrifying.
I get why you would feel that, and I cede the historical reference.
Yeah.
However, I actually will, and the whole thing about the rhetoric and the otherization, it's a dangerous slippery slope. It really is. But there is a class in America that's been running shit into the ground for a long time, and it's
but not every single individual in that class.
Of course, and this is why I'm ceding the
stereotyping that's the problem, right? He wants to point specific individuals who have done things. I have no problem with that.
That's a really, really good distinction. And thank you for saying that. That's a really good distinction because, and he does this a lot, right? Like he talks about specific companies. He's talking like,
that's totally fine,
right? And I think like because Bernie Sanders listens to this show, so he's paying attention. Insofar as I think focuses, I would say, I haven't been listening to, I used to be a staunch Bernie Sanders supporter, obviously, yang2020.com. But like he really does try and do that. But I think policing that narrative in his in the culture of his organization more might be a thing, even though that would make his job harder. Whereas for Andrew Yang, because of the fact that he's got the beautiful tapestry of policies that he does, and because of the way that he set up the freedom dividend, because of the way that he set up human-centered capitalism, he's keeping the best parts about capitalism. When you try and call what he's doing socialism, conservatives like my buddy Rio over here is like, nope, denied.
Yang is the most
pro-capital.
Right. Yeah, Yang is the most pro-capitalism candidate, hands down, including Trump. I mean, Bill Weld is as well, but what he's lacking is the fact that he's missing what Yang is saying, which is that sure, in an ideal world, it would be great if we didn't need something like the freedom dividend, but we do, and if you want to save capitalism, you've got to do that. And if you think about it, you have to compare the status quo to what he's proposing and ask yourself whether it's an improvement. And from a conservative perspective, going to a situation where fewer people are on welfare, where the middle class is essentially paying less in taxes because they're getting this massive tax relief, and where you're moving, instead of having a system right now, right now the status quo is we're overtaxing the middle class, and then we're trapping a lot of people in poverty with means-tested paternalistic programs, which I'm glad that, unlike a lot of people on the left, Corey, you admit is a real thing that's happening. You go from that to a situation where everybody's getting the same amount of money. So it's not, if you believe in capitalism is essentially like a game of Monopoly where you're competing, capitalism is about building wealth. It's not just about how much income you have, right?
Or should be. And honestly, that should be taught. That should be taught.
So having everybody get the same amount of money, and then and then from that fair starting point, you're competing for wealth. That is an extremely pro-capitalist way of reforming our current tax and spend welfare system.
Right, and to your point, it's been a long day already. I can't remember. I think it was the last episode that we did. We were talking about the fact that for you would like to see absolutely no federal taxes up until like a single income could handle a house, maybe a car, and
my definition of the middle class. I don't think middle class people should have to pay income taxes.
Okay, so but I think that the pursuant to that point, like basically that's the starting position that everyone has, where and like homeless people don't exist anymore. They are doing that one income situation, or having the capacity to do so, maybe with a federal jobs guarantee. Just kidding. But like where that is the starting point, no matter what, and incentivized as such. And then we could all compete to get up to the $25 million point. After which we just start going for I don't know, cool social credit or something. I have no idea.
Yeah, I wonder. What do you think about the correlation between like homelessness and illegal drug use, and like the cycle of how much it costs taxpayers to?
It's actually yeah.
I guess that my rosé is in a crystal glass now. So it costs taxpayers a lot of money to put homeless people in jail over and over and over again.
Couple things on that. Yeah. So my buddy Greg, is all about the homelessness issue. It's really passionate about it. He does a lot of work with it. So yeah, I used to think it was correlated with drugs. It's actually correlated with the fact that the healthcare in this country is garbage.
Oh no, that too.
The prime thing, and this is the thing. Like people think that people are homeless because of drugs, and it's not true. People are. Don't get me wrong. Like there's a bit of that, but it's actually a really, really small percentage.
Yeah,
the highest number of people that are the highest number of people that are homeless had one medical bill they couldn't pay, and now they're out on their butts.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. I that's not what I meant to say. What I meant was, like, given that drugs are illegal, right?
I see what you're saying. Okay.
When you have homeless people doing drugs and they can't do it in the privacy of their living room like a middle class person does, they have to do it out on the street where they're going to get caught. Right. It creates this feedback loop where people go to jail, and there's no motivation for a homeless person not to go to jail.
I see what you're saying.
Actually, if you think about it, homelessness is, even if you don't care at all about the actual homeless people, homelessness is very, very bad for society, because you have a whole group of people, and this is a growing group of people. There's no motivation for them not to break laws, including laws that are good laws, right? Yeah. There's no reason for them not to rob somebody. There's no reason for
jail sucks. Don't get that twisted.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, life on the streets isn't great either, right?
Well, no, like if it
means that they get a roof over their head, right?
Don't get me wrong. There are situations like that, especially up north. Down here, not so much.
Right.
But that's the, so like down here, being homeless is illegal. That's
terrible. That's terrible.
Yeah, it's not a good law, right? So you don't have to do drugs to get arrested. You have to be
just be homeless. But yeah, I guess I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure I actually got that point.
That's one side. But I
was trying to tie it into the actual topic of the episode. But yeah, no, I think that
valiant effort.
Yeah, when you have drugs that are illegal, it creates, whether it's homelessness or homeless people, or just, I think we can all agree they're targeting, when in terms of enforcing drug laws, they are targeting low income people in general, right?
Yep. It's easier. So they can't fight back.
Feedback loop where it actually costs taxpayers enormous amounts of money to put these harmless people in jail over and over and over again.
Yes.
They have to go through the legal system. We have to pay for them to be in jail.
Yep. Last point I wanted.
Money that we are wasting.
Yeah. Last point I wanted to make on this tangent. There is an organization called Housing First. And even Utah has done some stuff with this, where they're putting tiny home communities together. It is far cheaper to do the right thing and put a homeless person in a home without any conditions whatsoever than it is to keep putting them in jail.
Yeah, and Utah is the conservative state. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great policy. States have also been experimenting with essentially just paying for people's housing.
Yeah, and same idea.
They found out that was actually cheaper for taxpayers than having them go through this cycle of harmless criminality over and over again.
And and this is the thing that we're doing on the left here that I think will probably percolate into making sense to more kinds of policies. No means testing in any way, right? One of the biggest problems down here is one of the only places to get services down here for homelessness is religious institutions, and if you're not married, you get you can't go visit them even if you have kids. Like, it's really messed up, right? Like the religious exemption and stuff. If you happen to be gay, you go screw yourself. There's no way you're getting in and getting services. Yeah. So it just completely, or being on drugs or whatever, right? Like the real issues that you could have for that, they don't, they just don't discriminate, and they don't pile services on you when you first get there. They just no, first things first. Here's your house. Call us if you need us. You're a home, apartment, whatever. Yeah. And when you're ready, if you need help with anything else, we are here for that, right? And so it just gets rid of. And we talk about this with someone in the drug too, like the stigma and all that nonsense. It's like, no, this is actually, we're going to do the right thing. And here you go. We're just going to, do this. When you're ready,
and it's also literally
and healthcare and right.
It's also literally impossible in most cases to get a job without an address, right?
100%.
And how are you? I mean, you got to shower, you got to change in order to be presentable, right? So I do support those programs because, from a fiscal perspective, it has been proven that it is cheaper, which is why conservative states are doing it. It has been proven that it's cheaper for taxpayers. It's something that people forget, is that, like, having people live on the streets isn't free. But secondarily, it actually makes it possible for them to bootstrap themselves up into a situation where they're earning money. So now imagine like supercharging that with the freedom dividend, and you're just Now, I will say one thing though: if you're going to have non-means tested low-income housing situations like that, then you definitely, like, I mean, you still want to have a motivation for people to get out of it because it is still costing taxpayers something. So that is an issue.
Yeah, but like the whole idea that you would make it, here's the thing about that. Like the incentive to do that is just like make it shitty or whatever. No, just make it small. Make it small.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, like
so like if you want to have like I'm sitting in the media room of our house here right now, where it's a whole room that's devoted to just being on comfy couches and watching TV. Like if you want to have a room that's not the living room, right? If you want to have a room like that, then you gotta.
It's not a living room.
You got to get a job. Yeah, no, it's the media room, the living room.
Right. Yeah. No, and this is the thing. Like, and there. I can see situations where people would want to just live like that. And my answer to that is, so what?
Yeah, that's fair.
You
It's
know
still
what I mean?
better than having them on the streets.
That's right.
It costs us less money, and it's not pleasant. I mean, crime goes up when they're on the streets. It costs us more money, and it's not pleasant for the people who are walking around. Like when I'm walking around downtown LA, my experience would be drastically improved if I didn't have to step over, desperate people doing that. I'm not as much of a bleeding heart as I sound like, or I mean, I'm not, how do I put this? I'm not a bleeding heart, but I'm also not as much, I'm not as callous as I sound. I do care about these people. How could you not? I'm not a monster. But I think it's important to point out that like, you don't even have to care about them. There are so many other reasons to solve the problem.
That's my biggest thing. Like doing, and especially around here, we get on the local politicians who are, Republicans all the time. You could do the right thing and it would be cheaper, and still you won't.
Yeah, and some Republicans, including in Utah, they are doing that. So
right, and massively to their credit, and that gives me hope for the rest of the country. Quite frankly, that we can actually start figuring this stuff out. As does, let's be frank, this freaking podcast, which, as you said in the last episode, is a national freaking treasure. I mean, we're new, so people don't really know that yet. But seriously, this is how you save America. Not
to toot our own horn or anything.
No. I'm gonna blow that shit up. No, and really, like, obviously, I'm joking about it, but I absolutely love doing this. And it's been a really awesome change of pace for my.
Well, you know what's a national treasure is what this podcast represents, right?
Agreed.
Like It's America at its best is when people who get together and they can disagree, they can agree to disagree, they can disagree productively, and then come to common ground. That's what's missing right now is when neither side is willing to compromise.
Get excited about good ideas you agree on.
Whatever, like it doesn't matter what you want. Whatever it is you want government to do isn't going to happen when there's a stalemate. You got to do something. You got to come together at some point.
Preach. All right. So thank you very much for listening to the Moving Forward podcast. We will be back soon with more policies as we try to get through all of the policies before the election. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know. There's a lot of them. And this will probably release before the debates. I am sure we're going to do something around the debates. Make sure you watch them. Andrew Yang is going to slay. For sure.
He was a debate champion, wasn't he?
Legit debate champion. Yeah, so he's coming prepared, and that's the thing. Like, I think his interviews prove it, right? Every question he gets, he's got 9 answers. He's gonna run circles around you like you're stopped at all times, which is
my one concern about the debates is I'm worried that there's going to be just so many people up there that the rules of the debates, out of necessity, will prevent anybody, including Yang, from really being able to actually get into any detail at all.
He knows that, though. He knows that.
Yeah, no. Well, it's still, it won't be the same rules. Like if only our political debates were run as well as like college debate competitions.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
What is wrong with us? Why can't we do that though? You know what I mean? Like it's a pretty low bar.
Yeah. Well, he knows after watching, and because I know I've seen interviews and actually seen some tweets and stuff. They're watching tape. They're he's like a sports guy, right? Basketball or whatever. They're watching debate tape. Like, this is how much time I'm going to have. Obviously, it's a different story, so I'm going to have less. So whatever question they ask me, like, they may ask him about the freedom dividend, they might not, but he's going to come in and answer it anyway, right? Like he's good enough at media that he knows that he has to say $1,000 a month at one point around the debates.
Well, and it wouldn't even, agreed. It wouldn't even be artificial because it actually is a policy that does address so many social ills.
Ask me about climate change, $1,000 a month.
Well, I've actually seen him do that one. I've seen him do that one because he literally said something like, well, the reason so many people are unwilling to consider the fact that that's a real problem is because they're thinking to themselves like, well, that's going to mean more taxes and I'm already struggling to pay my bills. And so there's a psychological motivation for them to say like, well, that must not be true.
Yep.
Because it's too difficult to admit that it's real.
Yep.
Like most people, nobody wants to create a world that they're going to leave their grandkids where, you know, everything's going to hell and it's insufferably hot outside and San Francisco's underwater. Nobody wants to leave that for their grandkids. But there's this motivation for them not to believe it because it seems like this insurmountable problem. They're like, I can't even pay my bills. How are we going to fix that? And so it's easier to just kind of just refuse to think about it. And I honestly believe that's what's happening.
No, I think
so.
You're right.
Yang literally said that. Yeah, he
right.
literally pivoted from climate change to the freedom dividend. But I thought it made perfect sense. His point was, you're not going to convince people to do anything about this when they're desperate. You've got to get them out of that mindset of scarcity, and then we can talk about fixing climate change.
Yep. At 100%. All right. So thank you guys very much. And we will see you next time on the Moving Forward podcast. National treasure.